Bought a new tripod, taller than the last one. Not sure how happy I am with it. Hello, AnCaps. There's a problem I have been struggling with, and I was hoping that you could help me out and explain to me how this would work. And just to make this clear, this isn't for the night watchman state almost AnCaps. This isn't for the old school libertarians. This is for the serious, all government services are better in the hands of private industry AnCaps. The ones who just really want everything that the government does and provides to the people to be handled by private corporations. Especially security. And because you're all AnCaps and you know how economics works very well and you know how to run a business really well, you probably can demonstrate to me a business plan with which to counter this problem that 100% of societies will run into once the police is no longer provided by the government, if you understand how basic economics works, which of course you do, so you know that this problem will happen. My question is this. How do you provide an expensive service to an area where there is a huge demand for it, but no ability to pay for that service being rendered? Some people would argue that on the most technical and academic level, this does not even constitute demand, because if you need something but you can't pay for it, there is, in market terms, not any demand for it. But let's put that aside for a moment because everybody knows that that's not what this means. I am, of course, talking about delivering law enforcement services to poor areas. It is an indisputable, verified fact that poverty and crime are inextricably linked. Poor people are almost entirely powerless as economic agents and will stoop to desperate measures like violating other people's sovereignty in order to improve their conditions. In other words, they will steal your property. And unless you are there with your property at all times to prevent someone from stealing it, meaning you can never leave the house, they will take it from you. Unless, of course, there is someone protecting the house. If you want to have a job that requires you to at any point ever leave the house, they will violate the shit out of your nap. And of course, if you're a person with resources, you will be able to afford protection for your house. You will be able to pay someone to stand watch and make sure nobody steals your property. This is essentially what the police does right now. They may not stand watch in front of every single house, but the power of their investigative body and the authority of punishments through the legal system does make it so stealing from people is highly discouraged. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen at all, it is just highly discouraged. Which there is obviously a difference between doing something and then getting consequences for those actions, or doing something and then not having any consequences for that action. Thing is, the people most affected by the criminality of poor people are other poor people. This is also verifiably true. Thus, in order to keep the meager property that they have, they can never leave their house and thus can never have a job, because the moment they leave, they do not have the money to pay someone to protect their assets. It's a simple observation of economic facts that affluence and poverty will often be regional phenomena, meaning that real estate prices will be high in areas where there are few poor people, and poor people will go to areas where the real estate prices are low. Thus, areas with low real estate prices have a significant correlation with increased crime. In a world where there is no publicly funded police service to at least provide a minimum amount of security, this effect would definitely be exacerbated. This is why you get rich neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods. And having a neighborhood-based security concept is the most economical choice if you look at cost benefit. If you have a security contract for a large middle class or affluent neighborhood, you could primarily concentrate on securing the borders of that neighborhood to make sure that no bad actors get in. Fighting the crime that does happen within your neighborhood would be a lot cheaper and also a lot more violent, because affluent people are just less prone to violence because they're not that desperate. This would distribute costs over more individual households while at the same time not growing them proportionally with area covered, meaning that you can have each individual customer of yours pay less for the services that you provide. However, this is not true for poor areas. Policing itself is expensive. You need to train personnel and equip them with weapons and protective gear. Specialist vehicles need to be available. You need intelligence and surveillance equipment. You need facilities like secure shelters or holding cells. This is not to mention the cost of forensics, expensive insurance policies on personnel and assets, and legal teams. You might even have to pay for an oversight body to check if you are complying with the standards that the community sets, so you can put that badge on the contract saying, "We are a police group that will do everything very well. We have this verified by this other thing." And this other organization, of course, won't do it for free, though possibly the community you are policing will pick up that tab in order to not compromise the integrity of their investigators. Police officers and administrative staff, forensic scientists and coroners, lawyers, these are all highly specialized personnel that require big wages. And this is for areas that are generally safe. If you're trying to police areas that are unsafe, your costs skyrocket. You need better trained officers, you need more officers to cope with the increased workload, and also all of them will be demanding extra hazard pay. You'd have more breakage of physical assets, your insurance policies would go up even further because sometimes police officers will get wounded a little more in unsafe areas than in safe areas. You will have more vandalism of facilities, which will have to be larger in the first place. And you also can't just cordon off the whole area to keep the criminals out, because the criminals are already in the area. You would have to protect each of the houses individually, because the majority of the people in this neighborhood would not be criminals. They are, however, much more vulnerable to criminal activity than just people who live in affluent areas even without police protection. It is a strategic nightmare. And that's the thing, there may not be a lot of need for policing affluent areas, because crime just doesn't happen there. As long as you create a big gated community where you keep the scum out, that might be entirely sufficient. Poor areas need constant hands-on policing. This is essential, because otherwise they will be caught in an eternal downward spiral and never be able to increase their power as economic agents. But unlike the affluent areas, the poor people do not have the money to pay for policing. They already do not pay for policing. Most people in these poor areas do not earn enough to pay taxes, even if they are employed full-time, sometimes even with multiple jobs. And the few of them who do pay taxes, the amount that they pay is so small that it may just be discounted. The policing of those areas is paid for with the tax money of people who live in more affluent areas, and is overall an unprofitable venture. If your argument right now is, why should honest citizens that work hard and make a lot of money have to pay for the law enforcement of people who do not themselves contribute anything to the pot out of which that law enforcement is paid, then that same logic should also apply to private law enforcement, unless of course you are a hypocrite. Why should the people who are paying a security contractor to keep them safe also at the same time pay for other people that are not paying that security contractor to keep them safe? Any private police service that would only police wealthy and middle class areas without ever providing any law enforcement services to poorer areas would generate a huge amount more profit for their shareholders without compromising their ability to do their job. They just have a lot less overhead, and this is how you make ventures profitable. You cut corners. And this is the big AnCap argument, right? This is the, oh yeah, all the government things that the government does, private corporations could do better. So with police, how exactly would that look? Which costs would you cut in law enforcement? Would you invest less in officer training? That's certainly an amazing idea, having unqualified personnel in an extremely demanding and high-risk job. Are you going to cut back on giving them proper equipment? Well, say goodbye to the vast majority of your workforce, because nobody's going to work in a high-risk environment with no proper security gear and no proper gear to get the job done if instead they could also work a cushy job. Unless, of course, you force them to do that by using underhanded tactics. Same thing if you skimp on hazard pay. And remember, For most corporations, the biggest factor of overhead is paying their employees. Do you stop paying the oversight company that makes sure that you operate without corruption and properly to adequate community standards? Because the community you are policing that already cannot pay you will not also pick up the tab for the oversight organization. Obviously, they have no money to do this. And if you run the system like this, that's your 100% perfect recipe of having a completely unaccountable police force. Do you get rid of the attorneys that you have to pay so they can level charges in private courts that you also have to pay fees to against criminals that you have caught? And will you thus not make yourself judge, jury, and executioner as the police force? Will you maybe not invest as much into non-lethal and de-escalation techniques in order to protect your personnel and reduce the workload? These things are extremely expensive. It's much easier to just shoot the kid that you think is slinging dope on the street corner than trying to apprehend him. Do you force the poor people to pay for your services even though they cannot pay for those services? Are you at that point not the reason they cannot invest the capital they have gained through their own productivity, and thus the reason they will remain poor? Or will you offer them the opportunity to pay for your security services with their time and work by hiring them out to unskilled labor agencies, except you get the wages? You know, like slavery. Have you not now created your own personal little fiefdom where you are essentially an unaccountable king that can do whatever they want? Or will you just go for the most economic approach and just wall the whole area off and transform it into a literal ghetto? Or maybe you'll just take all those people, drag them out of their homes, load them in buses, and drive them out to the countryside. Release them in some unfertile patch of land where they can then live. That would, after all, free up inner city real estate. If you follow the philosophy of egoism, these are the things that you would have to do, because they do not have any negative consequences for you or the people that are immediately around you. They might even benefit you. It's not like the impoverished community can just pick a different security contractor for themselves. Being poor limits your economic choices, and if you try to get another security contractor to go in your impoverished neighborhood, they will have to set up their own new infrastructure, they will have to do upfront intelligence work, it'll be a huge investment that they will have to make beforehand with no guarantee that they will ever be able to recoup it, so probably they won't do it. And before you suggest a community-based approach, consider the fact that the most organized people in these communities, the ones with the best access to weapons and the ones with the best economic power, are gangs. You would essentially be making gangs into the police. All the moral people would not have access to the things that the gangsters have access to because they don't take other people's shit. This might even be beneficial for security companies and people who live in more affluent areas if the gangsters agree to make sure that their criminals do not go into these affluent areas, because thus the security services could just not provide services in those poor areas, and the rich people would feel no effects from this whatsoever. Hey, maybe even the costs of unskilled labor would go down, and then you, an affluent person living in an affluent neighborhood and paying for a really nice policing bill, will be able to hire those destitute people that do not have any police for way cheaper money and reduce your own overhead. Thus, you now have a vested interest in keeping them poor and making sure that either gangsters or people who will sell them out as indentured servants or slaves are the ones that are in charge of the poor communities. Because after all, we know that what is best for you is also best for everyone else. But hey, maybe I'm just a filthy statist. Maybe I just don't understand economics well enough. Maybe I've just been indoctrinated by the government too much to understand the obvious business model of providing police services to areas where providing those services would be more expensive than anywhere else, and also where the people who require those services have no means of paying for those services, without that business model also being an utterly inhumane scheme. So enlightened AnCaps who understand economics and all have their own businesses and really just understand how to properly run a business, how would this be done? Enlighten me. Tell me how this would work. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Consider liking and subscribing to this video, doing all of the things. There's a lot of stuff going on on YouTube right now. If you haven't seen the YouTube Rewind, don't. Maybe watch Optimus's video, where he mocks the YouTube Rewind. Righteously so. And in that spirit, because I forgot to put up the Patreon slide last video, I must have punishment for what I've done, and the patrons have decided upon a punishment that I must now perform. The thing is, I have not found the asparagus song because none of you have linked it to me, so I'll just, as right now the Patreon slide is appearing, will just be dabbing to some random rhythm as you have said I should do. So, dab, 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 and see you around, cunts.